Hey, Forest Mill. Glad you could join me this Wednesday night. I'm excited to continue our study as we keep going through the Psalms and everything. I hope you and your family are doing well. Looking forward to this being all over. It looks like it's going to be a few more weeks right now, but we are hopeful that will go quickly and that we'll be able to continue to at least meet online in the meantime. If there's any way, by the way, that we can serve you or help you um, during this time, we certainly hope you'll let us know, and you can call up to the office and reach one of the secretaries, or you can call me and reach me through my phone number, all available through the online church directory that we have, or the app. But we really want to hear from you and see if there's anything that we can do to help you. So each week as I start studying the Psalms, I'm struck by how much of them are dedicated to praise and adoration and rejoicing and celebration. Um, and as I read them, I wonder, like, are these people living in a different kind of life than I do? Um, I remember that these Psalms are inspired accounts of an individual's life, about their events. It's about what they're experiencing, what they're going through, and I certainly have a lot of reasons to rejoice. I've got an amazing wife and two fantastic kids, and we're really blessed to live in Manchester and work with Forest Mill, and we have food in our pantry, and we have clothes to wear. I mean, there's all these things that really blessed with good health and great family, but I don't know that if I recorded my internal conversations with God, that I would reflect this much joy and celebration that we see in the Psalms. So I keep asking, were their lives just better, or is there something else going on? Author Leo Buscaglia tells a story about his mother and their, what he called it, their misery dinner. It was the night that his father came home and said it looked like they were going to go into bankruptcy because his partner had taken off with all of their firm's funds. So what his mother did was she went out and sold some jewelry to buy like this great food for just a sumptuous feast. And a lot of members of the family scolded her for it, but she said to them, this was her response: "The time for joy is now, when we need it most, not next week." And so as we look this week at one of these Psalms of celebration, we need to remember that rejoicing is not always based on external circumstances, but rather it's an inward joy. It's a joy that looks at for God's life and God's activity, regardless of whether the circumstances are what we'd like or not. Our joy should not be just this whimsical feeling that comes and goes. It's a decision to give God credit and give God glory for all that He's due. It's a recognition that our Father is in control and that we have a special place in His grand designs as His children. And that's a perspective we can gain from looking back at God's faithfulness, about His presence in our lives and in the past. So if you have your Bibles and you want to read along or follow along, we're going to be looking at Psalm 66 tonight. There is nothing in going through this. There's nothing particular in the title of this psalm. It's not attributed to David in most of the ancient texts. So many of the psalms are attributed to David, but and others are attributed to Asaph or other great writers. But many of the psalms have no attribution. And so over the years, people try to figure out, could this be by this person during this event? And we just, the long and short of it is we just don't know. In fact, many of the ancients, in looking at this particular psalm, thought it might be a celebration of the restoration of Israel after their Babylonian captivity, coming back from Babylon. Others looked at it and thought that it commemorated the deliverance of Israel from Egypt. They're coming into the promised land, the establishment of the worship of God in the tabernacle, or maybe in Jerusalem. So maybe it was one of those great events, or maybe it was just one man's rejoicing in God. So we'll read it from that vantage point. We're beginning at verse 1 of Psalm 66. Shout with joy to God, all the earth. Sing the glory of his name. Make his praise glorious. Say to God, how awesome are your deeds. So great is your power that your enemies cringe before you. All the earth bows down to you. They sing praise to you. They sing praise to your name. Come and see what God has done, how awesome his works in man's behalf. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the waters on foot. Come, let us rejoice in him. He rules forever by his power. His eyes watch the nations. Let not the rebellious rise up against him. So the call here is not for a specific group of people or a particular group of people. This is a call for everyone to join in singing praises to God. And you can see that this is certainly applicable to us today. This may have been in some ways prophetic about the coming day when praising God is not limited to Israel. It could be and very well be a reference to all of creation singing praises to God. And verse 3, the word submit, I read it, which is a literal translation. I read a little more literal translation, which is to cringe before God, to just, you get the idea that you're in the presence of someone great and you've done something wrong and you just, oh no, right? The term translated worship, on the other hand, is to kneel or bow down. And so you may see that the Hebrew is clearly intimating that this is like a forced submission. It's not a voluntary submission. It is a power that brings the man to his knee, but it is love alone that wins his heart. Pharaoh said he would let Israel go. Remember, after all the plagues, he said he would let Israel go, but he just couldn't do it. And so he had submitted in word, but not in his heart, right? He let the people go, and then he had second thoughts and chased them down ultimately to his own demise in the Red Sea. And I wonder if sometimes we're not kind of in that boat, that we respond to God just out of fear of the ramifications of what could be, our fault or our guilt, right? We respond to God out of this fear. And for many who first become Christians, that's a powerful motivation, right? We begin following Christ because we don't want to suffer the eternal consequences of our actions. But that fear is a short-lived motivator, right? For us to truly continue following God, it has to be out of love. And so the opening verses of this psalm present a call and an expectation that one day all the earth is going to worship God one way or the other. And there's a particular focus on the glory of God's name. In the New Testament, we read Philippians 2:10, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, and of things in heaven and things in the earth and things under the earth, that all of creation is called and will worship God. Worship thrives on wonder, right? We can admire and appreciate and maybe even adore someone without having that sense of wonder. But we cannot worship without wonder. For worship to truly be worship, it has to contain something of the otherness of God. That God is so far above us or beyond us, and that he deserves all the credit and he claims all the praise. And that should create in us a sense of awe. I think creation itself was meant to instill some of that in us. And maybe you've looked at a sunset or stood at the ocean or looked at the mountains or stood in the edge of the Grand Canyon or that you've seen something in creation that's just caused you to be amazed. And so that creation was made to point us towards a creator. And that's what worship is. It's being in awe of the creator. It's remembering the character and the person of God that we have seen, that we have experienced, that we have lived. And down in verses 5-7, the author looks back at some of God's glorious history, how God delivered the people of Israel through the water on dry land, which could be a reference either to the Red Sea, probably is a reference to the Red Sea, but could also be a reference to the River Jordan when they walked through the River Jordan on dry land. How that's the kind of capable God we have. Sometimes we sing a song that sums up this idea. I stand in awe of you. I'm not going to force you to listen to me sing that, but that's the idea that's being captured here, is that we just stand back in awe of our God and in awe of our Creator and Redeemer. Maybe it's just me, but when everybody, and I love this about Forest Mill, but when we all lift our voices in individual praise, but we do it collectively, not just singing the notes of the song, but truly in praise and awe, there's a sense of completeness in that. It's like we're doing what we were made to do. And that seems to be the urging of the author of this psalm, to find our purpose in praising God. See what God has done. How great is our God. Continuing reading now in verse 8. Praise our God, O peoples. Let the sound of his praise be heard. He has preserved our lives and kept our feet from slipping. For you, O God, tested us. You refined us like silver. You brought us into prison and laid burdens on our backs. You let men ride over our heads. We went through fire and water, but you brought us to a place of abundance. I will come to your temple with burnt offerings and fulfill my vows to you, vows my lips promised and my mouth spoke when I was in trouble. I will sacrifice fat animals to you and an offering of rams. I will offer bulls and goats. Again, this portion recounts some of the great acts of God, but this time it appears this is from more of a personal or a collective memory, not in the distant past. You can almost hear the author asking, "Hey, do y'all remember when? Do you remember that time?" And look at what he remembers. What had God done for them? He says, you refined us, right? God had put them in prison. He'd put burdens on their backs. In other words, God had put them through a tremendous difficulty, a tremendous time of trial. But then through all of that, according to verses 8 and 9, he had protected them and preserved them. Even when they were enduring these times of great difficulty, they knew God was with them because he was bringing them through this. There was a party of pioneers on the trail west, and they had suffered for weeks. They'd had scarcity of water, scarcity of grazing grounds for their animals. Many of the wagons had broken down. There'd been endless delays, stifling heat, and this feeling of frustration and fretfulness and futility prevailed in their group. All of their optimism and cheer they'd started out with, those were gone. Courage was in limited supply. So one night, the leaders called a meeting. They were like, we're just going to let everything air out. I'm paraphrasing here. We'll let everybody air out their complaints. And so when they gathered around the campfire that night, one man stood up and said, before we commence our grief session, don't you think we should at least thank God that he's brought us this far with no loss of life, no serious trouble from the natives here, and that we have enough strength left to finish our journey? The other settlers agreed, and so there was a brief prayer. And after that prayer, all they could hear was the distant cries of a pack of wolves. There was otherwise stone silence around the campfire because no one had any grievances they felt were important enough to voice at that point. They suddenly realized that if they couldn't be satisfied with what they'd received, they could at least be thankful for what they'd escaped. Thankfulness enabled them to see the mercies of God that they had been overlooking. So, brothers and sisters, we have been through a difficult time here recently, but no matter what we may have been through, and I fully realize many of you have been through more than me, but whatever it is we've been through, it was God that brought us through. We don't deserve to be here, regardless of wherever your here is. Often we've sang and listened to the familiar old hymn, Amazing Grace. Sometimes when we sing or listen to those familiar words, we can ignore the meaning that we ought to be getting from those words. One of the lines in that song says, "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." When you stop and realize for a moment just where you would have been if it weren't for God, then you begin to see how powerfully God has been preserving and protecting you personally. And I believe that's the thought that the psalmist is conveying here. We're praising God, not just because everything is going right, but because God has gotten us to this point, and we trust his faithfulness to continue that. So let's continue reading the psalm here down at verse 16, and we'll kind of finish up. And I think this next verse, by the way, is one of the focuses or the main ideas in this particular psalm, when the psalmist says, "Come and listen, all you who fear God. Let me tell you what he has done for me. I cried out to him with my mouth. His praise was on my tongue. If I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened, but God has surely listened and heard my voice in prayer. Praise be to God, who has not rejected my prayer or withheld his love from me." And I just think that should be the rallying cry of every Christian who has ever experienced the deliverance of God. Let me tell you what God has done for me. Do you remember the story of the demon-possessed man that's recorded in the Gospels? And particularly, I'm thinking about the account in Mark chapter 5. It was the man who was in the tombs. We're told he cut himself with rocks. And when Jesus questioned who he was, the demons replied that they were legion or many. And Jesus cast these demons out into some nearby pigs, caused a big uproar in the region of the Gerasenes or the Gadarenes. But when the people from the nearby town came out, they found this formerly possessed, crazy, insane man clothed and in his right mind, the Gospels say. And so they were so afraid by this upheaval that they just asked Jesus to leave. It was just too much for them to take in. So when Jesus was getting into the boat to leave, this new convert, the formerly demon-possessed man, came and he asked Jesus, can I go with you? And do you remember Jesus' reply to him? Instead of telling him to come along and get away from this bunch of heathens, Jesus said, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, how he has had mercy on you." And Mark 5:19. So go and tell what the Lord has done for you. Come and see what the Lord has done for me. Now, maybe you think that your story isn't this dramatic, and you're looking at your own story and think, "Oh man, nobody cast out demons from me." But so you're maybe tempted to think, why would anyone care about my story, about this bit that God has done for me? Or maybe you have difficulty thinking, what has God done for you? And I would encourage us to be more conscious of what God has done and is doing in our lives today. But your story deserves to be shared, not just deserves to be shared like you're bragging on yourself. You're bragging on what God has done. And so you're not telling it for your benefit or for your glory. You're telling it for the benefit of God. You're glorifying Him. You're letting everybody know what you have seen and experienced in the providence of God. So, my encouragement for you this week, my prayer for us as a church this week is that we may look at our own stories, however great or small you may think your story is. It is an important part of the story of God. That's what we have been called into. Our little stories are but pieces of a greater puzzle, and they need to be shared because they glorify the one who has delivered us, the one who has provided for us, the one who has brought us safe thus far and will safely bring us home. God bless you, church. I hope this has been an encouragement to you. We look forward to meeting again together this coming Sunday morning. God bless.